Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Godzilla podcast. Well, I wanted to do a quick video involving the looks to be the last final figures in the domestic box office for the Kong Skull Island film. I thought I would cover this because when it comes to this monsterverse that involves the Godzilla movies, the King Kong movies, and then ultimately the crossover movies, it's still important to point out what their box office is for each respective film, because we want to make sure that they're successful. That way the stuff still continues thereafter. It's like a set of dominoes. Each one has to work with one another in order to knock each other out. Other if one of those doesn't do the trick, then the whole set doesn't get knocked down. But in this case, let's go ahead. Let's see what the final figures are for the Kong Skull Island film. And I mentioned final figures because it looks like it's pretty much been released in all the major markets that are out there. I'm pretty sure there's probably like a couple of countries that it still has to go in. But for all intents and purposes, the major ones, the big ones, like the places in Europe or the places in the Asian countries, those are pretty much done. So all the other smaller ones that are still left, they're just going to add little tiny amounts. So in this case, let's see what the final figure is. So here it is. So far, on a worldwide basis, it has about $565 million between the entire world domestic figures. Of course, that's not including still anything involving its upcoming home video release, all the digital release copies, anything along those lines, the DVDs, the Blu-rays, whatever is the case. All that stuff is still left to tally, but that is the final box office figure. Ultimately, that looks like that's a good deal because it started off a little slow here in the US. It had a somewhat tepid release in terms of its first week total box office, but then it kind of went down, not quick, like it didn't crater, but it did have, in this case, a smaller amount than expected here on the U.S. It grossed about 167 million, which under most circumstances would be considered not great. Like, it's not good, but it's not great either. Not enough to necessarily warrant a sequel. But as is usually the case in these films today, it's the overseas box office that truly made a difference. In this case, it grossed nearly $400 million in the rest of the world. So if you add the two, that's where you get the 565 million. And so it goes to show that to this very day, movies that are being made do not have really the US in mind anymore when it comes to the total box office. In this case, they're primarily being made for the overseas market, especially the ever increasing importance of the Asian markets, those that are in China, that are in Japan, that are in Korea. All those places definitely play a factor. And then when it comes to comparing it to how the original Godzilla film made, the one in 2014, they're actually pretty close. That was very interesting to note too, because it seems like in this MonsterVerse set of films so far, the same people are watching the two movies as they're being released. So I'll give an example. The Godzilla 2014 film, again made about almost 3 years ago when it was released, it had a total box office of 529 million. And again, the Kong Skull Island one had 565. So it's off by about 30 million, 35 million or so. But it goes to show that the same audiences practically saw both movies, almost the same number of audiences. Now there's still some other factors to include, like inflation, and there's also the fact that there was probably more of a 3D release with the Kong Skull Island film too, and then ticket prices would be a little bit higher as well. But for all intents and purposes, if you eliminate those, it would be pretty even. So that's good news on that part. But yes, ultimately that is the final box office for the Kong Skull Island film. I have my own thoughts on the movie. I'll include the link for it below if you haven't had a chance to see my video on it. I thought it was ultimately a pretty good movie, like not great, but still a worthy entry when it came to the so-called MonsterVerse. And all of this is just continuing to build to the next set of movies that'll include more of the MonsterVerse, and that'll be, of course, the Godzilla 2, the King of the Monsters film, and then ultimately the Godzilla vs. King Kong film. No word yet, though, if there's going to be a sequel, a direct sequel to the Kong movie. Like, in other words, a standalone sequel rather than, let's say, a shared MonsterVerse sequel. Not like the one where with Godzilla he has his own King of the Monsters film, but who knows, that may just change thereafter. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.